One of the things I've been doing, more for the enjoyment of it, is working through Homer's Iliad slowly, in the looking at the grammar, reading it, trying to look at each word grammatically. As I've said on other videos about the Iliad, my background is in Hebrew Bible and ancient Near Eastern languages and New Testament Greek, but I'm enjoying just somewhat teaching myself and going through Homer's Iliad slowly. And maybe I hope it will help maybe some other person to read through it, look at the grammar closely, and then translate it. I am enjoying doing this more for fun, I guess you would say. So I'd like to pick up where I left off. We have seen in looking at it that the muse is it begins by sing muse of Achilles' wrath, which brought sorrow and death to the Achaean camp. We see this in the first, actually, 7 lines of Homer. And one of the books, several books have helped me a lot. Selections from Homer's Iliad by Benner, which was published many years ago, 1908. And also the book that I really appreciate a lot is the classic interlinear translation of the Iliad of Homer, which was published at first very, very early back in 1888, where it goes through Homer and the Iliad and puts it in a readable English. But one of the things that you pick up on is vocabulary. And I would like to just continue to read through that with grammar, and also then go back to the way that Homer actually organized the poetry, which is different. But I think if one can enjoy reading and learning grammar, then one can move on from there to look at Homer and the way he has ordered it, can I say, placed the words together in the Greek text. Also, as I've said on other videos, for those that want to read it according to hexameter meter, there are many people that know how to do that on YouTube. And I'll just leave that to anyone to use that, because they do a much better job. I was not trained at all in classical Greek, so I don't know hexameter and reading it, but you can find that on YouTube. But what I'd like to do is explain the grammar. I enjoy grammar a lot, especially Hebrew and Akkadian and other Greek, New Testament, Septuagint, and so forth. And I have videos out on that. But I'm going to keep working through this for anyone that might want to follow along. So following the introduction, where the muse is encouraged to sing about the sorrow and death in the Achaean camp and the wrath of Achilles. This is followed then by Chryses, the priest of Apollo, who comes to the Achaeans to try to ransom his daughter that Agamemnon has taken captive as his own prize. And we see this in lines beginning at line 8 and going up through line, one second here, line 21. And we've looked at that. We've looked at each word grammatically in other videos. And then we saw how Agamemnon harshly dismissed him. And so what he does, he prays to Apollo to avenge him. And we see this in lines 22 up through line 42. And so following that, and we looked at that, where Apollo heard him and responds and comes down from Mount Olympus and begins to shoot his arrows against the Achaeans. And this is followed then by describing how that happens. And then Achilles will call an assembly and try to appease the angry god Apollo. So we pick this up in line 43, and we see as he prayed, the God answered him as he prayed uh, for the God to do something about what Agamemnon had done. And so as we read through this, the God came down and sets and begins to shoot the darts or the arrows into the Achaean camp. And by the way, there is a beautiful poetry in the way it's described. It said you can almost hear the arrow flying and the bow, the clanging of the bow. Dene de tlange genet argure argure oya bit oya. In other words, you can hear the silver bow, and you can almost hear the arrows flying and the clanging of the bow. Argure oya bit oya. And this is something that you cannot capture in, let's say, in a translation, that kind of sound. And Clyde Farr points that out in his inductive grammar, that one of the beautiful things about reading Homer in the original is you hear actually the sound of what's happening, and you can't capture that in translation. I know Thoreau said Homer has never been translated, and I think that's what he was talking about. And you know, one of the things as a Hebrew teacher and of Hebrew scripture and Greek scripture, New Testament, I think that's true of the Bible as well, that I've often encouraged my students and pastors to go to the original language and to really think about it, meditate in it, because you cannot capture the original by a translation in a total sense. You can get the sense, but not the poetry and the beauty and the literary assonance and so forth. One example, if I could illustrate it from Hebrew, would be Psalm 23. Lo irara ki ata imadi. I will not fear evil, for you are with me. Well, how do you translate lo irara, that literary assonance or alliteration, in a translation? You can't say, I will not fear fear. Well, it's the same kind of thing here. You can hear the rattling or the clanging as he comes down, as the god Apollo is now coming down to judge Agamemnon and the camp of the Achaeans. And you can hear almost the arrow flying, Argura oya, bit oya, and so forth. And I appreciated Farr's comment on that, where he points that out. And he said, you know, you can't capture that. And so I believe Thoreau was right. And I say that, I've said that to my students. I believe that's true when it comes to the Hebrew Bible as well and to the Greek New Testament. But as we go on, he then, and we pick up in line 50. And so I'm going to read from the interlinear translation. But before I do, I think it's important from line 50 to 57, we'll be reading, to look at the vocabulary first. So we have nekus, nekuas, which means a dead body, apoikamai, which means to assail or to go, to come upon or to assail, urius, and then Ureras actually is meaning a mule. Argas, arge, argan, swift. Ephemi means to shoot or hurl. Apek, akepukes, meaning sharp or biting. Thames means that which is thick or crowded. Thameas, thamei, thamea, if we were going to give the feminine the neuter. And then a neymar means 9 days. Kalas, kalu, meaning arrow or dart. Luko, and then meaning actually white. Actually, let me read the whole word. I'm sorry. It would be uh, Luko lenas, Luko lenan, meaning white armed, and Kado, meaning to grieve or hurt, Charao, to see, Agero, together or assemble, and Amegeres, collected or assembled, Anistemi, meaning to stand up, and then Metafemi, meaning to speak. So I find that one of my first goals is to look at the vocabulary, and the dictionary is a tremendous help uh, to look at that, to uh, try to work through the Greek dictionary on words, and then the reading becomes well, it makes it possible to read. So let's go back then to where we stopped, and I am going to read. Um, Actually, I'm going to read, picking up where we left off last time, and it's concerning what the god Apollo is doing. And we looked at how we hear the twang of the silver bow, flange argure oya bit oya. Now we move on. First, indeed, he was assailing the mules and the swift dogs. So the first attack by Apollo was against the mules and the swift dogs. And that is basically starting with the animals. And then from the animals, we're going to see the plague coming upon the forces of Agamemnon. So he assailed, and notice, looking at each word here, apokatai means to assail, and it comes from the root apoikamai, and notice it is the imperfect indicative active third person singular from apoikamai. That is, he went upon, or we could almost translate this, he sailed or came upon the mules, ureas, and the argus kunas, and the swift dogs. And then it goes on, autar epita ephes autoisi. That is, reading it a phrase at a time, but then sending on them. We're talking about the Greeks here. Autar, meaning but or then, a conjunction. Epete, then, aphes, sending upon. Notice aphes is from apheemi, and it means to shoot or to hurl. And we have the present participle here, sending on them from apheemi, sending upon them. And notice al toisi is the dative plural. So sending or hurling upon them, and then a bitter dart, ekepukes belos. And notice here, ekepukes means sharp or biting. Uh, and so he sent a dart, a bitter belos dart. And belos would be arrow or dart, sending upon them. He was striking them or casting against them. Notice Baal here, he did, or he was striking them, is your imperfect indicative active, third person singular from Balo. So he was striking them, and then he goes on to talk about the result. Dethamei purai nekuon ai kayanta. That is, and thamei means that which is frequent, or we could say frequent funeral piles of dead bodies were always burning. And that's the interlinear translation of the interlinear text that we're using, uh, which is basically putting the translation underneath the uh, the Greek. So, and frequent funeral piles of dead bodies always were burning. And notice thamei and purai are feminine plural from frequent adjective and then a noun, purai, funeral piles. So we're looking at feminine plural, meaning thick or crowded. We could translate it funeral piles. Nekun of dead bodies. Here we have the genitive plural of dead bodies. Always were burning. Notice kai anta is your imperfect indicative active, uh, third person plural from kaio. So they were always burning. This is looking at a plague that was happening, and many were dying, and so forth, from Apollo and what the god was doing with his arrows, starting with the animals and moving then to humans. Then we go on. Anemar men kela the oya oketa. That is 9 days indeed, or the darts of the god were going. And notice as we look at this, we have how long the god was shooting, 9 days. And the kela is the darts. Here we have an accusative plural, neuter. So the darts of the god, theoia, we have the genitive here, okita were going. Okita is from oikamai, meaning to go. So the arrows of the god was going. We have the imperfect indicative middle here, uh, third person singular from oikamai. And I'm thinking this is probably a collective singular. So the arrows were going ana stratan, throughout the camp. And ana is a preposition showing that it was throughout the stratan, the camp of the Achaeans. We have the darts of the god Apollo going. And then te decate Achilles. But on the 10th, that is on the 10th day, Archelaus, Kalesata La'an agorende. Archelaus called the people to assemble, to an assembly. Notice kalesata is your aorist indicative middle, third person singular from kaleo. So he called the people, the direct object, la'an, agorenda, for assembly or to assemble. And notice here, he's gathering an assembly and he's going to try to do something about what's happening. Gar lukolenas thea here theke epi fresin to. That is, for the white armed goddess Juno. Notice here, lukolinos is the adjective, white armed, thea, goddess, here would be Juno, goddess Juno, theka. Theka is from tithemi. It is your aorist indicative active, third person singular from tithemi. For the white armed goddess Juno, placed it epiphresi, upon the mind. Notice here, phresi is plural and it means mind. So he placed it upon the mind or upon the thoughts to him. To. To is your dative article, and it looks like what is happening. The goddess Juno is putting this upon the mind of Achilles to call this assembly and to do something about what's happening. Garkedita Dinion, for she was caring. And this verb, kado, means to care for, or to grieve, or to hurt. For she was hurting for the Danaans, that is the goddess Juno. It's interesting. Kedata is the imperfect indicative middle, third person singular from kedo, which means to grieve or to hurt. So she was grieving for the Danaans because hatira rata, because indeed, here we have the reason why she is grieving. She was seeing them harata thene skantas. She was seeing them dying. And notice harata is your imperfect indicative middle, third person singular from harao. She was seeing them thene skantas dying. And here we have a participle, an accusative participle, masculine plural from the nasco, present participle. She was seeing them dying. Present participle accusative plural from the nasco. She was seeing them dying. But then she assembled, or he assembled the people together. Notice de epe, but when, therefore, hoi agerthin, when they were assembled, from agero, to assemble. Here we have the aorist indicative passive, aorist indicative passive from agero, when they were agero, when they were gathered or assembled, collected. Notice we go on, collected together, and were collected together. Genanta is from genomai. It's the second aorist middle, indicative middle, third person plural from genomai. And they were gathered, and they were, we could say, hamegeres. They were collected together. And this means to be assembled together or collected together. Hame gereas. And then, following that, Achilles then, swift as to feet. Achilles okos padas is going to stand up and speak to them. Notice here, Achilles, swift as to feet, anistamenos, standing up, metaphe toisin, spoke to them. And here we have anistamenos is your present participle, nominative masculine singular, present actually middle participle, nominative masculine singular from anistemi. So standing up, he spoke to them. Metaphe is from metaphe, to speak. It is the aorist indicative active third person singular from mataphemi, meaning to speak, mataphemi. So he spoke, toisen is your dative plural. He spoke to them. And then we're going to stop there, but we'll hear what Achilles then proposes as to how to appease the angry God. So having looked at the translation and trying to read it and look at each word, we go back then to the way it's read in the Homeric Greek itself. And I'll just read it slowly. I'm not doing hexameter, but just reading it. Dane deklange genet argura oya bit oya. There's that arrow that we can hear. And dreadful was the clang of, became the clang of the silver bow. Ureas min proton epoketa kaikunas argus. That is, notice he is first of all was going upon the mules and the the swift dogs, and then altar epet autoisi belas ekapukes ephes. Then to them the bitter darts he was sending. Then to them the bitter ephes he was sending. Bal a de purai nekuon kayanta thamei. It's interesting here, and this is pointed out by far. Baal is emphatic in the way it's arranged in Homer, in the way the Greek of Homer, the order, I should say, casting, and always the fires were burned. In other words, he was striking. That's the emphasis that the text is giving according to Farr here, and I think that's true. It's emphatic. It's first in place in the sentence. And so he was striking, and always the funeral pyres of the dead bodies were burning thick. And Baal here does seem to me to be emphatic as well. I think Farr is right on there when he says that. Then we move on. Achilles calls an assembly and proposes to appease the god. And notice, and by the way, I'm following, like I said, selections from Homer's Iliad by Benner, his outline, and I appreciate it very much. Wonderful, wonderful work. Anemar min anastratan oketa kela theoia. And that is but 9 days. Indeed, against the army, the darts of the god were going. So they were going for 9 days. And then te decate dagarende kalesata la'an Achilles. On the 10th day, then, this is when Achilles called an assembly of the people. Togar epi fresi thekatha a lukolinas chere. That is, for to him. And I'm thinking here, to is emphatic, to him, upon his mind, his thoughts, the god or the goddess Juno had placed it. In other words, for him to call an assembly. And we've looked at the translation in the other interlinear that we went through. Kedata gardanayon hatira theneskantas karata. For she was caring for the Danaans, because indeed she was seeing them dying. In other words, she had a heart to help because she was seeing what was happening from Apollo. Hoi de peun agerthen hamegereas tegenanta. That is, and then they, at that point, they were gathered together, collected. When they were collected, then Agamemnon, or Achilles is going to speak to them. Toiside danastamenas metefe padas okos Achilles. To them, standing, he spoke, swift of feet, Achilles. And so, again, we're looking at Achilles speaking to them now and trying to find a way to stop this plague. I'm going to stop there. I'm having fun talking through this. I hope it helps someone. Let me just say this. If anyone is interested in doing Hebrew and Greek New Testament and Septuagint, I have a number of videos where we work through the grammar of many of the texts in the Psalms in the Hebrew Bible and also in the Greek New Testament. And we've also done an Akkadian grammar in which we work through the laws, the epilogue of Hammurabi. And if anyone would be interested, they could find that out on YouTube. So again, thank you for your patience. One of the things that I think I'm appreciating from doing this, it helps me to keep my mind fresh, learning a new discipline, which is what classical Greek is, for me anyway. So thank you. I appreciated being able to share this.